Dan Perry is the former chief of Associated Press in Europe, Africa, Middle East, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. This is going to be welcomed by a significant chunk of Benjamin Netanyahu's supporters, but wider Israeli society, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind that there's the potential in this deal for an arrangement that would be not just acceptable but welcomed by the overwhelming majority of Israelis. But we live in a strange time where leaders have direct access to the public via social media, circumventing the mainstream media, and oftentimes flooding the zone with nonsense and lies. And that may happen in this case if Netanyahu decides to try to besmirch the deal by presenting it as something that I think, if you read the 15 points, it is not. Now, I completely understand skepticism about whether Hamas would really disarm, concern that when the deal speaks of heavy weapons but not personal weapons, that might be a way to somehow enable Hamas to remain somewhat armed. The timeline issue of who withdraws first and who disarms last, all this stuff, the modalities and the details, I get that they're skeptical and they want to negotiate real hard. But that would be a yes, but. Instead, we're getting a no from the Israelis, which is so unfortunate, and I think is misaligned with what the people in Israel generally would want if they understood correctly what's going on. Again, I have no naivete about Hamas. But even the idea that there is a declarative agreement to disarm is something that should be welcomed so clearly that it's incontrovertible. By the way, I keep hearing about a trade-off between Israeli security demands and the needs, obvious needs. We see on screen the obvious need of the Palestinian people and to alleviate and fix the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. These are not at loggerheads. If the Gazans live better, then the chances that Israel will face a popular attack by armed elements in Gaza or from elsewhere are diminished.
I want to ask you a question, and I want to take you back to January, when the Board of Peace was actually formulated. At that time, Benjamin Netanyahu was, I'm going to say, politely cynical about all of this, but he didn't actually ever want a Gaza Board of Peace headed by Donald Trump at all, did he?
Look, with Netanyahu, you can say he's skeptical in ways that are justified, or you can say he's obstructionist because of reasons that are either ideological or political. And the political reason would be that, of course, he led a government that included far-right elements that wanted the war to go on. And I think that latter issue should be behind us because the government's gone. I mean, they've set a date for elections. The far-right can no longer bring him down. So right now, whatever's happening is purely obstructionist. But as I say, it could be attached to skepticism that's warranted. But if you read the 15 points, realistically, there is enough there that a normal Israeli government that represents the actual will of the Israeli people should embrace it with demands that things occur in a certain order and that no games are played. And Imran, I mean, in the Middle East, the games are legendary. I mean, Hezbollah in Lebanon is one enormous game. I understand their concerns, but let me say something that may be an optimistic note. It's extremely likely that Netanyahu will be gone by November.
I want to expand on that. It was going to be my next question anyway. We have these elections coming up. This speech that Netanyahu gave did sound like he was setting out his stall. He actually talked about Gaza. What he said was, as for the Gaza Strip, first of all, I want to make my main point clear. As long as I am Prime Minister, there will be no Palestinian state, not in Gaza, not in Judea and Samaria, neither Fatistan nor Hamasistan, he said. And then he also talked about Iran as well. So was this the kickoff for his election campaign? Everything we see is going to be reiterated all the way up until the elections.
Yeah, this cuts both ways, and it's interesting. And I have to say, you know, Netanyahu got himself elected prime minister numerous times, so presumably he knows what he's doing. But from where I sit, a logical approach of Netanyahu in this campaign, and he's well behind in the polls, would be to tack to the center and to give Israelis some hope and to maybe try to cut into the support for the opposition, which is much more moderate. However, I think he's trying to play on the fact that whereas most Israelis, contrary to what you might hear and many might believe, don't want control of Gaza, they want to wash their hands of Gaza. It's also true they fear a Palestinian state. There are ways around this, including demilitarization of a Palestinian state. But the idea that Israelis fear that if they just pulled out of the West Bank, they would have invasions of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv from Kalkilia. And remember, Israel would then become about 10 miles wide. That's a real fear. And Netanyahu seems to be gambling that if he draws out the opposition and tries to get them to say, well, we favor a Palestinian state, which they won't right now, then maybe that is a more effective way than the one I recommended, attack to the center, to somehow win back votes. Anything being said right now by Netanyahu in public has to be seen as part of his campaign. At the best of times, I would not trust public statements by officials in the midst of war or peace negotiation. But if you add to that an election campaign, just expect pretty much nothing but gaslighting. But the bottom line, if they really do reject this deal, that would be an unfortunate thing.
Dan, you know this as better than perhaps most. In the background of all of this, Netanyahu faces two court cases on corruption that have been slowly winding their way through the courts. Every time it gets to a place where there might be some sort of movement in those court cases, Netanyahu cries national security and they stall. He is worried about his legacy. He's worried about what he's thought of after he's gone. And these court cases seem to be driving this forever war that he seems to be in. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a fair thing to suspect, and there are elements of truth, but I don't think that this is the bottom line. He does fear that if he doesn't have the prime ministership to give him the excuse to not show up in court now and again, then the cases will be concluded more quickly, and somehow his chances of ending up in jail will be increased. I actually think the chances he ends up in jail are minor. Not that the cases aren't serious, but it'll go on and on forever, and eventually some version of a pardon actually is likely. He probably could have organized such a thing in exchange for stepping down already. I don't think that's what's driving the forever war. A lot of things are driving the forever war. I mentioned Netanyahu's far-right and quasi-fascistic coalition partners on the one hand. Another hand is that Hamas has refused to step down, disarm, or hand over the hostages for years. I mean, any practical, rational, and decent operation running Gaza would have enabled Israel to end the war by essentially surrendering. That hasn't happened, and that was a factor as well, would you not say?
Right. Dan, thank you so much for your thoughts.